Hi, everyone. I know that in Mr. Rogers' class for ELA, you guys have been working on poetry, and we already talked a little bit about figurative language together. We talked about personification and similes and metaphors, but today I wanted us to go over the different parts of a poem together a little bit, because those can be a little bit tricky too. So when you write a narrative, a story, or you write a paper, you use sentences, and your sentences make up paragraphs, right? Well, the parts of a poem are pretty similar to sentences and paragraphs. So they're called verses and stanzas. So a stanza in a poem is kind of like a paragraph in a narrative or a story that you would write. So if we look at this poem here, I can see that some of the lines of the poem are grouped together because I can see that they're separated with some space in between, right? I can see that these lines are grouped together, these lines are grouped together, and these lines are grouped together. When you have a bunch of lines that are in a group together, that is what a stanza is. Kind of like a paragraph, how you have a bunch of sentences in a group together for a paragraph, right? So that's how you figure out what a stanza is. Now we also have verses. Now verses are kind of like a sentence in regular writing, you could call it. So a verse you could also call a line in a poem. So sometimes there might be punctuation at the end of a verse, or there might not be. It depends on what the writer wanted to include in their poem. So let's see. So if we wanted to figure out how many verses something has, now this is just a stanza, right? Because it's one group of lines of the poem together. We would just need to count how many lines there are in the poem, and that's how many verses there are in the poem. So this one would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That's how many lines or verses are in that stanza, in that poem. Okay. Now, so we talked about verses and we talked about stanzas. We know that a stanza is a group of verses, right? Because if we look here, we identified all of our stanzas. We counted 1, 2, 3 groups of lines or verses. And we can see that each stanza is made up of verses, right? Lines. Okay, so I also want us to talk a little bit about rhyme in poetry. Now, when we talk about rhyme in poetry, we always look at the last word of a line or a verse to figure out what our rhyme scheme is going to be. So if we look at this poem, I think this is the same one as before. We have snow and sleet and snow. Will the winter never go? Now, when I read that out loud, I can hear really well that they rhyme. But if I look at just the end, the last word of the lines, snow and go, rhyme. If I read my next lines, what do beggar children do with no fire to cuddle to? Do and to, the last words of the lines, they rhyme, right? Perhaps with nowhere warm to go, snow and sleet and snow. And now we have go and snow. The last words on the lines, go and snow, rhyme. Not all poetry will rhyme, but some does. And when we have rhyming, we usually have a rhyme scheme. So a rhyme scheme is just a pattern that the rhyming follows. So if we take a look here, on our last slide, we marked the last word of each line to figure out if they rhymed with each other, if the two lines rhymed with each other. But one way we can mark a rhyme scheme is with letters of the alphabet. So words that rhyme are marked with the same letter. Those two lines are marked with the same letter. So we said that snow and go, the last words of those two lines rhyme, right? So we could mark both of those lines with the letter A, the same letter for the same rhyming sound. Now we also said that do and to rhyme for those two verses or lines, right? So we can also mark those with a letter, but we need to use a different letter of the alphabet to represent that it's a different rhyming sound, because snow doesn't rhyme with do, right? Snow rhymes with go. So we had A for those. Do and to rhyme with each other, so we had B, but go and to don't rhyme. So we can't use the same letter for these rhyming patterns. Now, if we look at the last lines here, we have the word go and we have the word snow. Now, I noticed that they used the letter A to mark these lines of poetry for their rhyme scheme. And that's because these words have the same rhyming sounds as these words: snow, go, snow. Those are all rhyming words still, right? So we can mark those with the same letter of the alphabet. So now, say my poem was a little bit longer. Say I had 2 more lines in my poem, and they end with the words how and now. So how would I mark these with a letter of the alphabet to track my rhyme scheme? Let's see. Well, how and now rhyme with each other, right? So I would need a letter for these. I would need to use the same letter for how and the same letter for now. But what letter do I use? Do how or now rhyme with any of the other words we've seen so far at the end of the lines of our poetry? Snow, go, do, to, go, snow, how, now? No, they don't rhyme. They're a whole new part of the rhyme pattern, right? A whole new part of the rhyme scheme. So I'm going to need a different letter to represent these words. I'm going to see if I can highlight them in another color, maybe. So we would need a different letter to represent these. I'm going to make them blue. And I'm going to mark them with the letter C, because we've had A and B. So the next letter we would use would be C to mark our rhyme pattern, because we have a different rhyme sound, but we still have rhyming words at the end here. So that's how we would mark our rhyme scheme.